Equidox by Onyx. Reach everyone. Okay, is everyone able to see my screen and Equidox?
Yes, see that.
All right, perfect. All right, so welcome to Equidox. For those of you who have not seen this before, this is our PDF remediation tool. What I'm looking at here is just the main homepage, something similar to what you'll see when you log in. Now, if you're a standard user, which I presume most of you will be, you will probably have a blank slate when you first log in. You won't see these documents that are in there. So there's some different access permissions based on your setting as either an administrator or a standard user. So if you log in, you don't see any documents in here, don't panic. You can put documents in to work on your own. Now, the first thing I want to mention is the fact that we are operating in a web browser. So this is a web-based application. You don't have to install any software on your specific device, which is really handy. And it also helps us work with that concurrent user licensing model. So you can have as many people on campus with access to the tool as you would like. It really just boils down to how many are logged in simultaneously. So there's nothing to install or update or maintain. Every time you log into Equidox, you're going to be using the most up-to-date version of the code. So it's very easy for you on your side of things. Now, we're looking here at a list of documents that have been imported into the tool already. You have some basic sorting features up here, which are pretty self-explanatory if you've used other applications before. You can also choose to look at these in a grid view or a tile view. Or like a tile view or a list view, whatever you're comfortable with, you have that option over here as well. Now, the way that we get documents into Equidox to start populating this list to begin working on them is if we come over here to the second tab down on the left-hand side, if I press this button here, it will bring me to this page. And I have two options for getting documents into Equidox. You can either upload and import them, so files that are coming off of your hard drive, or if you have done like a website audit or a crawl of your website, maybe you have a CSV file or a spreadsheet that contains a bunch of URLs for PDF documents that are already located on your various websites. So you're able to import from URLs by just copy and pasting those URLs into this field here. And then a blue import button will appear. The only thing is that those URLs have to be public. So if it's like something behind like a login, or if it's like a locked document of any kind, then you're going to need to either unlock it or download it to your hard drive and then import it through the upload process, which I'll explain now. So if you're taking documents off of your hard drive, you can just open up the folders on your computer and select some PDFs that you want to bring into the tool. So I've already got a few selected here. So I'm simply just going to drag and drop those into that gray area. And very quickly, I get these green check marks indicating that the documents have been uploaded. So now there is a binary copy of these documents up in the cloud, and it's now in a format that is ready for Equidox to import. And then that blue import button appears once those documents have uploaded. And when I press this blue import button, that is going to kick off this automated process where Equidox is just bringing these documents into the system. And while it's doing that, it's looking for anything that it can figure out about that source file. So some of these documents might have existing tag structure. If that's the case, Equidox will import those existing tags, and it allows you as the remediator to either maintain that existing tag structure and either make adjustments to it or make some changes to that tag structure if you'd like to. Or if it's very poorly tagged to begin with, which is often the case, you can use Equidox to basically redetect everything and kind of start from scratch. Sometimes it's faster and easier to just let Equidox and the automation kind of do things a bit differently than the auto tagging that might have already occurred on that document. Oftentimes coming from Microsoft Word, for example, when you hit save as PDF, sometimes there is like an automated process where tags are generated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfectly accurate. And that's really what Equidox is for, to take those PDF documents and make those adjustments to retrofit them to be compatible with screen readers and compliant and all of that good stuff. Now, also, you'll probably have documents where you have no existing tag structure in that file. And if that's the case, during that import process, Equidox is going to recognize that there's no tags, and it's going to begin that tagging process for you. And it's going to do that by recognizing different bits of data within that document And it's going to start drawing reading zones for you, which we'll cover in just a moment. And those reading zones ultimately convert to PDF tags when you go to export the file at the end of your remediation process. So those documents are now all in the system and they are ready to be worked on. When I go back to the document list, I see that those files are now sitting here at the top of this list for me, and I can work on them at any given time. Now, I also have notifications just letting me know that those documents are in the system, so that's not overly exciting. I'm not going to really focus on that too much, but you don't have to be sitting there watching the documents import. If you're importing like a group of documents and maybe they're longer, larger files, you can be in other areas of the application and everything is still working in the background. So you don't have to sit there and stare at the status bar as those documents import. I'll mention a few things on the settings tab very quickly. Now, if you're a standard user, you're only going to have this labels tab here within the settings, and the labeling system can be used at your discretion. If you'd like to use it, you can. And basically, you can set up a color, choose a color and a label name, and add that label with this plus button. The global checkbox will allow all users to share this label. Otherwise, if you leave it unchecked, it will just be a personal label for your own account. Now, what the labels are for is really to just organize documents and keep things broken down by like individual projects or individual departments. If you're like an administrator and you have like, if you have your hand in a lot of different projects at the same time, a labeling system is a good way to quickly filter out those documents from the documents list. If you have labels applied, you can apply those filters through here, and you'll just see documents for a specific department or for a specific project. However you want to set up the labeling system is totally up to you. And it can be used or not used. It's really up to the individual users. Now the group system, this might be another thing that comes in handy. You can put different users into groups. And this is a way of kind of partitioning off the account. So if you have like a specific team working on a specific type of content, you can put them into a specific group, and then they're able to easily collaborate and work together on the same documents. This is another option that you have, and this is set up by administrators if you'd like. And then adding new accounts. So if you'd like to add new accounts, this is really only for administrators to do. But if you'd like to add new accounts, you just need their email address. You can apply them to a group if you'd like, if we have any created. And then you can choose to make them an administrator or just a standard user, and you can hit create. And that will prompt them through email, which many of you have already gone through that process. I can see that you've already registered. So most of you have done this already, but if you'd like to add more, it's very simple. You just use the email function here. Now we can also link up with your single sign-on solution as well. So if you authenticate your applications through Microsoft or Google or Shibboleth, we can integrate with those platforms. So if you'd like to talk about single sign-on, it's really just a few keystrokes on our end, and we can get that set up for you. One other quick thing I'll mention is the cascading style sheets option. So if you have any, if you're interested in converting any PDF documents into HTML content, maybe to be posted to your websites, you can apply a cascading style sheet to those files when you export them so that it will have the same colors and fonts and branding as the rest of your website, so it won't look like a plain black and white HTML file or like a typewriter wrote the document. So if you have any CSSs that you would like to upload to Equidox, you can do so here. One last thing is the help tab. So if you're struggling with anything, we do have an end user guide in the application. This will answer a lot of those basic how-to type of questions. This is a Drupal website, so you can start kind of like drilling down into specifics. So if you open up the user guide, maybe you're struggling with something that has to do with tables. This will bring you to this page here. There's a brief description of how to work with the tables. There's a screenshot. There's a tables video, and then there's even more granular information about tables down here as well. So you can kind of drill down and figure out, what is the element type that you're struggling with. There's probably an answer in the end user guide. If you cannot find an answer in the end user guide, fear not. We do have a help button down here, and this is with you wherever you go in the application. So this will always be present. This works just like any sort of standard contact us form that you would have filled out in the past. But just let us know your name, your email, give us a subject, a description, letting us know anything that you're experiencing that seems abnormal. Please let us know. We are happy to help in any way we can. What is extremely helpful for us is if you give us the actual URL of the page that you're working on. So every page, when you're in the actual page editing process, has a unique URL. So if you can give us that URL, that's very helpful, because ultimately, you know, a couple months from now, you're probably going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of documents and pages within Equidox. So if you're struggling with a specific page, giving us the URL allows us to assist you much more quickly, rather than having to like ask you which document, which page it's on. Just sending us the URL is extremely helpful, and someone will get back to you typically within the same day, if not within like a couple of hours. Unless if you're sending it in at midnight or whatever, someone will get to you in the morning. You can also upload files as well. So if you have like the source PDF and you have a question about it, you can give us that source PDF file. You can attach files to this and then just hit send, and that will go directly to our support team. And they are like official Equidox support. This is not like a third-party support line that supports 100 different applications. This is a team that is dedicated specifically to working with our Equidox users. So please don't be shy about using this help tab. We are here to help. It's part of what you're paying for with Equidox. We know that PDF remediation can be complicated and tricky, just in the nature of the beast, because PDFs are just finicky documents, and we're trying to fix these old documents to meet modern standards for accessibility. So things can be kind of tricky and nuanced at times, but please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here to help. Okay, so we're back at the main documents list, and that was a crash course there through like the main interface. But let's find a document here to get started with, and I'm just going to choose this document here because it's maybe I'll choose a different one, something that has a bit of heading structure. Let's try this one here. I'm actually going to skip the cover page. This is an OCR scenario. I can work back to that later. But I'm going to start on page 2 when we actually get into that. But when we go with when we click on a document, we're presented with the document detail page. On this document detail page, you have some different options. You can share the file with other users. So if I wanted help on this document from one of my teammates or someone else in the Equidox application, you can share this document with any of your colleagues through this drop-down list. And if you had groups created, you could also share this document with an entire group of users as well. So that will allow them to access the file and collaborate and work together. Keep in mind that being web-based, you can actually have multiple people working on the same document at the same time. So maybe it's an extremely large like textbook, or it's the annual report, or it's the course catalog for the entire university. Maybe it's a 500-page document, and it's very intimidating for a single person to have to try to tackle all of those pages. But being that this is web-based, if you wanted to, you could have 5 people working on that 500-page document. Everyone takes 100 pages, and you can kind of work through it in a couple of hours, rather than one person having to clear their calendar for the week to tackle that one single document. So keep that in mind, that you can collaborate through, because this is a web-based application. Now down below, there are different tabs on the document detail page. The properties tab gives us basic information about the document. So the title of the document, which can be changed if you'd like. If you'd like to update that title, you can, maybe to indicate that this is the accessible version, or whatever you'd like, it's up to you. You can set the default language for the document. So if there is a document that is not in English, the English is the default setting for the language attribute. But if you have any documents or foreign language classes, anything like that, you can choose the language from this drop-down menu, and that will indicate to the screen reader which language to read the document in, so that it won't be mispronouncing all of the words with an English-sounding screen reader. Also, if you have bilingual documents or documents containing more than 2 languages, you can also set the language attribute for individual reading zones as well. So if you have, some sort of important information packet or something that might be presented in 3 or 4 different languages, you can still handle that and set the language attribute for all of those different languages whenever it's required. Down here, you have some basic metadata about the document. We're not too worried about that right now. One other thing I'll mention before jumping in is the output tab. So we're not going to remediate all of these pages today, because it does get a little bit repetitive. I'm going to jump around between a few different documents. But if I were to finish off this document and remediate the entire thing from start to finish, I would return to this output tab. And I have 3 different formats to choose from to take the document out of Equidox. Now, PDF is the most common. Most of your documents, I imagine, will be going in as PDFs and coming out as PDFs as well. So if you choose PDF, it's really just as simple as hitting generate PDF, and Equidox will create this brand new document for you. It will visually look exactly the same as the source file, except it's automatically going to have all of that tag structure that you have set up through the reading zones, which we're going to get to in just a moment. So it's very simple to export a PDF. You can generate that PDF, and you can generate multiple versions of it. So if you generate a version and then you realize that you've made a few mistakes or you need to go back and fix it, all of your zones and everything will still be maintained for you in Equidox, and you can go back in and make a few adjustments and just generate a new version of it. So there's really no limit to how many times you can output a document. It's really up to you. If you're just doing something for testing or something like that, you can generate a PDF as many times as you need. Now, there's also two other formats, HTML and EPUB, which are really quite similar in a lot of ways. But let's just say, for example, you're exporting to HTML. You're not going to have the same visual aesthetics as that source file. So you're not going to have the page-by-page breakdown like you get with the PDF. You're going to get a very linear, very simple-looking version of an HTML file. But if it's simply about structuring the data in a way that's accessible, HTML is a great format to consider. It's just easier to work with from an accessibility standpoint than PDFs. So if you'd like to convert your PDFs into HTML, please feel free to export in the HTML format, or EPUB if you'd like to export in EPUB as well. So it's nice that you can remediate the document one time, and you have three format options. You can have any or all three from one remediation process, which is handy. So this is just as simple as hitting download HTML, and it will package it together for you like in a nice little zip file with all of your HTML data and your images. And then you can distribute that or send it off to your webmaster to get posted up on the website, wherever it needs to go. It's yours and you own it, and you can send it wherever it has to be. Okay, so I'm gonna actually start on page 2 here. Page 1 was a scanned page, so it's an OCR situation, optical character recognition. I don't want to start us off with OCR, so I'm going to just jump to page 2, and we'll pretend that this is the first page of the document. So when I arrive at this document here, what I see right away is this big yellow box that is staring at me here on page 1. And this document was actually previously tagged, not tagged well. Imagine that it's a document for creating accessible PDFs coming from the Department of the Interior, as it so happens, and they didn't tag it well. So it's kind of a funny little, kind of ironic that it's a document about creating accessible PDFs and it's not really that accessible. So this document right now, as it sits with this existing tag structure, is just one big P tag wrapped around this entire page. So one big text zone. Text zones equate to P tags. So if you're familiar with like the Adobe jargon, P tag indicating paragraph, and this is a text zone, which is what we would call it, reading zones. They really equate to the same thing when you go to export them. So what I can see right away is that this big text zone right here is covering up all of this. So I have headings, I have a list, I have all kinds of stuff going on with this document, and I don't have any sort of structure to it. It's just going to be read as one giant run-on paragraph. It's not going to make much sense at all, especially when you get down here into things like the list, for example. Now, one really important feature of Equidox is this button up here, which looks like a computer monitor. And if I press this button at any given time during my remediation process, what this button does is it will open a separate tab for me in my browser, and I can see an HTML preview of all of the data on that page that I'm currently working on. So this gives me feedback from the application right at the point of remediating the document, where if I'm setting up my page correctly, I'm going to see nice, clean HTML structure here in terms of my headings, my lists, my tables, my reading order. All of that is going to be presented to me here in my HTML preview page to just give me confidence that I've done a good job and I can move on to the next page. So it's very clear to see that this is just one giant paragraph as it currently sits. But if I were to make a change to this document, which I'm about to do, I'm going to see that preview page have like a pretty dramatic shift. So in order to change this, I could grab like this, I could delete this zone and start drawing new zones and resizing things and trying to cover up all of these different paragraphs manually. But one thing we can do is if I go to the page tab over on the left-hand side in the upper left-hand corner, I have this tool here called the zone detector. And it's just this sliding bar. So if I just take this zone detector, and if I just move this around and start sliding it, you'll notice the granularity of the reading zone starts to change. So the way that Equidox is detecting the data is being controlled by me. So I'm determining like how focused or how zoomed out I want to be on this page. So if I bring it all the way over to the right, I still get this very large paragraph here, but it's still able to detect the list, so on and so forth. But I want to find like a good setting just to give me a good starting point. So something in the middle, something that looks like this is pretty much perfect. So now instead of having that one giant paragraph that I got from the original tag structure, I've thrown away that original tagging, and now I'm letting Equidox redo that because it was incorrectly tagged to begin with, and now I'm able to override that by just using this zone detector. So now when I refresh my preview after making that change, now I have something that is more reflective of that PDF page. I have actual paragraphs. I still have a few things that I need to adjust, like this list, for example. I have headings that I want to address as well, but I'm off to a much better start than I was before. So going back to continue making a few changes to this document, when I use the zone detector, by default, all of the text elements in the document, unless it's like an image or a link, a URL, for example, everything is by default going to be set as a text zone because this is, of course, text, but it's up to me as the remediator to determine if this is a heading or if it needs to be changed into another zone type. Now, in this case, I'm going to mark this as a heading level 1. Just because we're pretending that this is the very first page of the document. So I'm going to mark this as a heading level 1. Right now it's a text zone, and I can see that over here in my zone type. Keep in mind that there are 3 tabs on the left-hand side here, and this is where you'll do the majority of your work. The Pages tab is the least exciting. It just gives you the thumbnails of all of the pages, and you can jump forward if you'd like to navigate to a specific page. The Page tab is for making changes at the page level. So things that I do on this Page tab will affect the entire page. So the zone detector, for example. And the Zone tab is where I can interact with individual zones. So if I want to make a change to a specific zone, when I can just select that zone, the Zone tab will open up, and I can make an adjustment to that specific zone. Now, I want to change the zone type for this element here. I want to mark it as a heading. So I can use the drop-down menu if I'd like, and I can change it to a heading from a text zone. And once I've done that, by default, it's a heading level 1. So where it says here level, that's indicating heading level 1. I can use the arrow keys to move that up and down if it's a heading level 2 or 3, for example. But that's one way of going about it, is using that drop-down menu. However, I like to use keyboard shortcuts because it's a lot faster and easier. So if I want to change this next section here, so this is, I'm going to call this a heading level 2 because it's a subheading of this heading level 1. So if I were to call this a heading level 2, I would simply select that zone and hit 2 on my keyboard. And if you notice, it's changed in the upper left-hand corner, indicating that little green flag indicating the zone type. Instead of saying TX, it now says H2. So all I have to do is just hit 2 on my keyboard. I'll do the same thing down here. I'll just hit 2, and it changes to a heading level 2. And now when I refresh that preview, when I come back here, I'm going to see that there's an increase in that font size to just confirm that I have, in fact, set headings for these different elements. So again, I'm just getting that feedback from the application to know if I'm doing a good job or not. So I'm seeing it right here in the plain black and white text. Now, there's one other element on this page that definitely needs to be addressed, and that is this list down here. So this is that list as it currently sits. It's kind of just a strange run-on sentence. It doesn't make much sense to leave it that way. There's nothing to indicate to the end user that this is intended to be a list and that these are various list items that make up that entire list. So what I'll do is I'll just go back to the PDF page, and I will select this zone here where the list is located. And if I just hit L on my keyboard, L is another keyboard shortcut to change the zone type. So L for list. This green bar will then appear down the left-hand side of the zone. And this green bar is really just looking for the list labels. So in this case, they are the bullet points. So these list labels just need to be lined up with this green bar. And once they're lined up, I have a list detector down here. So it's another tool similar to the page detector, except this one is using, excuse me, this one is using machine learning and computer vision to detect the different elements, the different list items that make up this list. So this is a much fancier detection tool. It's still very simple on the front end where you're just having to move this slider back and forth. But what's going on in the background is actually pretty complicated. So if I just move this from left to right, what it's doing is it'll now break that list zone into various list items. And you get these little green or these little grid lines here, which can be adjusted and moved around if needed. But most of the time they don't. Usually the machine learning is able to get it spot on. So all I've had to do is move that slider bar from left to right 1 slot. And if I hit the preview button again, now I actually have a real list. And all of this will be properly converted into a PDF tag tree when I go to export it. So right now I'm just looking at this HTML and it's like, well, who cares? I want a PDF document. This is really just your validation tool at the point of remediation. So when you see that you have a good list here, Equidox will automatically convert this HTML source code into a PDF tag tree for you. So you don't have to go into Acrobat and identify the list label and the list bodies and group this all together, where a list like this could probably take you, 5 or 10 minutes of just fiddling around with it in Acrobat. In Equidox, it takes 10 seconds. You just have to hit L on your keyboard and move that slider tool from left to right, and you're done. So that's really all I would need to do to this page. Now I could get picky. I have headers and footers up here. Maybe you don't want to include headers and footers. So there's multiple ways of going about that. Now this is a 14-page document. It wouldn't be a big deal to just hit remove zone on that header up there if I don't want to include that. If you can just hit remove zone, that zone will then disappear and it will then be essentially an artifacted piece of content. So it won't be read in the tagged reading order because I've removed that zone. Down here, we have the revised dates and the page number. If you wanted to remove these, another way of going about it, rather than having to hit remove zone or hit backspace on your keyboard for every single element that you want to artifact, if you have something that's in the same location on every page, maybe it's a logo or it's a footer or a page number that you don't want to include. Another really nice tool that you have is the ignore feature. So this ignore feature is if you just draw a zone and all it has to do is touch a specific zone or set of zones. You don't want to make the ignore zone very large. I'll explain why in just a moment. But if you keep it small and just have it touching, and if I change that to an ignore zone by hitting I on my keyboard, or I can go through the drop-down menu and change it to ignore. What that will do is it will artifact all of the content that is inside of those specific zones that it's touching. So when I refresh this preview, I'm not going to have that footer data anymore. It's now gone. And the beauty of the ignore zone is if I go to page 3 now, I am already going to have that ignore zone there waiting for me. So it's gonna copy itself to all pages moving forward in the document. This could be handy for textbooks, for example, where it's 400 pages and every single page has the textbook name and the chapter name or the author name up in the upper left and right hand corner, for example. That gets completely redundant to have to tag over and over and over again. An end user is not going to want to have to hear the title of the textbook as the first element on every page. So using the ignore zone there to just wipe out all of that repetitive stuff is a really quick way of dealing with it. And it copies itself to every page in the document. Now, the reason why I said you have to make the ignore zone small, it doesn't have to completely enclose those zones, and you don't have to make it large enough to fit inside everything. It just has to overlap a little bit. And if you make an ignore zone really large, it might be fine on the page that you're currently looking at, but you could be getting to subsequent pages in the document, and you might accidentally be artifacting information that you actually want to include. If the margin on a specific page is a little bit smaller than the others, whatever it may be, but you might accidentally be overlapping with another zone. You'll see here, if I were to change that to an ignore zone, it's going to artifact this entire block of text. So if I go and I press the preview, you can see that that entire paragraph, which should be here, is gone simply because that ignore zone is touching it. So that ignore zone might have looked fine on page 1, but you get to page 2 and it's uh-oh, I've artifacted this entire thing. So you just want to be careful of your sizing and then resize it if that's the case and make it small so that it's not going to impact anything else. That's probably about all we need to cover on this specific document. It does get a little bit repetitive. It's a lot of text and a lot of images that don't really require descriptions. Or at least I can use another document to explain images. But are there any questions on anything that I've covered here so far? I'm happy to stop and pause if anyone is confused or needs a further explanation on anything. Okay, great. So I'm going to close out of this document and I'm going to jump into something else. Let's see here. This is a pretty good one for images in reading order. All right, so I'm again here in another document, pretty straightforward PDF, a lot of text. You know, this might be like similar to a syllabus or like a course or a class handout or something that you might deal with on a regular basis, but it's mainly text and a few images. So one thing I want to mention is the images tab in all documents. So if you have images, this is something that, you know, images need either an alt description or they need to be artifacted and removed from the tagged reading order. Now on this images tab, what I get is a consolidated list of all of the images in the document in one location, which is really handy because you can, if you're familiar with the document, you can kind of quickly go through and provide all of that alt text in one location without having to kind of stop and break up your rhythm on every single page as you're remediating. So you can start your process here and handle your images right up front. Maybe you want to wait till the very end and tag all of your images after you've remediated all the text elements in the document. Or if you just want to look at this to get like a feel for how many images are actually located in this document, this is a really handy tool to have all of these consolidated images in one location. Now, this is another example of a document that had existing tag structure. So this document, I believe, came from, you know, Microsoft Word, which is very common. And Microsoft Word will typically do some sort of auto tagging. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right. But in this case, the images, they came in, you know, as JPEGs, I presume, and they already had what would be considered alt text applied to them. So at some point during the publishing of this document, there were alt text applied to these images, but that is, again, not necessarily accurate alt text. Now, in this case, the alt text for this image here, which is like the logo for this fake construction company, the alt text is the name of the JPEG and the location on the person's C drive. So not a very good alt text at all. It doesn't make much sense to leave that in there as an alt text, and it actually repeats itself down here. So another exact iteration of that same alt text. We can certainly improve on that alt text. And if you know exactly what that logo is and what it says, you can make that change right here. You can update that alt text in this field, and you can then just save your properties if you make any changes to your images. Alternatively, you have this logo down here that continues to repeat itself on every page. So I have a bunch of iterations of this exact same logo. And this is fine to include, you know, maybe once, maybe on the first page and on the last page or anything you'd like. It's not wrong to keep it included on every page, but it does get very redundant for an end user who's having to interact with this document with a screen reader, that they have to keep being reminded that there's this same stupid logo on every page. It doesn't really add any value to the document at a certain point. So my general rule of thumb would be to like leave it on the first page and ignore the rest of them. But if you have an instance where you want to just, you know, wipe out your images in a document, everything is just like a decorative image, nothing is really adding any contextual value to the document. One thing you can do is you can hit hide all zones and then unselect the visible checkbox. And when I do that, those fields for the alt text have now vanished. They're gone. So what I'm essentially doing there is artifacting all of the images with just a couple of clicks. So you might have documents like that where none of the images are actually adding value. It's just something that's there to take up space and look pretty. But there's really no alt text that's going to add any value to the document that you can provide. So you can always just artifact those types of images. And you can do that on an individual basis by using these checkboxes, or you can do it to all images at once. So it's really up to you. So I'm going to bring those images back just for the purposes of training today. And I'll actually jump into the first page itself, and we'll take another look. So if I jump into the first page here, what I get is this. Again, keep in mind that this PDF input was tagged. I'm actually notified of that down here. The PDF input was tagged. I see a couple of things on this page already. So here's those 2 images that I saw that have like the JPEG file name description. I can change that over here as well. So if I need like a better view of the image, I can actually come into the page, kind of figure out the context for which this image is sitting in the document to help me provide a better alt description. And then down here, I have like an iteration of that logo, which already has the alt text, which is good. So I don't have to make any adjustments there. But this is a pretty straightforward page. One other thing I notice is like this text zone here, this just like floating text zone that was there waiting for me. This is the type of thing that you can get from Microsoft Word. Someone might have been putting together this cover page, and maybe they were just, hitting the carriage return. They got down to here. They started typing something, and then they started backspacing, and maybe they left like an extra space bar in there. Like, who knows what would have happened? But there was some little bit of content here, even though it's not a visual piece of content, something that triggered Microsoft to put a P tag right there for no reason at all. So there's no content there. It's just an empty P tag. So this is an example of like things you have to look out for when you have automated tagging. You can just have these random like floating P tags for that have no content underneath them. It's just something that happened during the publishing of the document. Someone was a little bit careless with the template. A lot of different things can happen that can produce kind of inconsistent PDFs, but that's really what Equidox is for, to fix little mistakes like that. So if you use like the zone detector, for example, it's going to take that zone away. And if you ever need to go back to the provided tag structure, you have a button to do so. So if you press this provided tag structure button, it will bring it back. And I'm wondering what happened to the images. There they are. So the images checkbox is another thing I'll explain in a second. So there's that text zone again. You can also just hit backspace to get rid of it if you need to. But you can also use that zone detection tool. So first things first, I'm going to just mark this company profile as a heading level 1 by hitting 1 on my keyboard, and it's now a heading level 1. And then I have these 2 images here. Now, if you can tell, these images are like mirrors. It's a mirror of each other. So this is really an instance where I don't need to have 2 alt descriptions describing this logo as it's mirrored against itself. It's kind of like pointless to type the same thing twice. Now, if I go to the page tab very quickly, you can artifact all of the images on a single page with this image checkbox. So if I wanted to get rid of those images, for example, I can just unselect that. And now both of those images have been artifacted, as well as this image down here, the little logo down here. Now to bring those back, I can just hit the checkbox again. And I don't need this mirrored version of this image, right? I don't need to have 2 of the same thing. It's not adding any value to type in Newson Construction Company upside down and backwards mirrored logo. It's not going to add any value. So I can just hit backspace while I have that image selected, and that will artifact that mirrored version of that image. And now I'm just left with the single logo. And I can then update my logo alt description. So I'm actually going to type in Newson Construction Company logo. So I'm able to provide a real alt text and not just a file name as there was before. So that's going to fix that image. And I have my heading up here defined. My image down here already had that tag, that I already had that alt description in the existing tag structure, so I don't need to worry about that. And then I have like the basic contact information down here, so I'm not too concerned about that either. I could get cute with it, and I could start like breaking this down into like individual P tags if I wanted to. It's kind of like, your discretion if you want to get this granular with it. You even have like an email here. I could turn this into a link if I wanted to. I might as well explain that now. So this is not actually like a real URL. It's not an interactive like object in the document itself. I can create it as one if I'd like to. I can place a zone over the top of it, and I will hit U on my keyboard, or I can change the zone type to link. And when I do that, I then have the option to add in an anchor point for that link. So if it's an email address, I'm going to type in mail to and then a colon. So mail to is just like the prefix to turn this into a link. And then I would type, Newson admin at Newson Construction. Admin at Newson Construction.co.nz. I think that's it. Yep. So that's how you can add in a link that's not actually there. Now, if this link was actually already an interactive object, so if this was actually like if this was linked in the source file, that would already be waiting there for me. I wouldn't need to then do that. It would already have that link zone there waiting for me with the anchor point that was in the document. But in this case, I don't have it there. So when I look at the preview now, I've made it manually, and I have a reading order issue, which I can fix quickly. But this is that link now, and when I click on it, it's going to open up my inbox and like a composed email to that specific URL. So that's one way of going about it. If you'd like to turn something into an actual interactive object, you can just draw a zone around it, change the zone type to link, and type in your anchor point. If you have like a web address, for example, your prefix would be https:// and then the web address. So if you wanted to go to google.com, www.google.com, you would just have to type in the appropriate prefix for those types of links. So it's pretty straightforward. But like I said before, if the object is actually linked in the source file, you won't have to do any of that. It's going to be there waiting for you when you import the document. All right. So the reading order is a little bit out of whack right now. And if you weren't aware, the reading order is it's actually determined in the upper right-hand corner of the zone. There's a different number there. And I've been doing a whole bunch of crazy things to this page, and this is a very long-winded way to go about doing this page. I can assure you under normal speed, this would be about a 10-second page. But my reading order is a little bit crazy right now. So to fix that, all I'm going to have to do is go to the Page tab and press Reorder. And that's going to reorder things in a top to bottom, left to right sequence. So this is now reading zone 1. This is reading zone 2. Reading zone 3 is actually this image here, which is artifacted. So it's taking up a sequence in the reading order. So this one is actually 4. It doesn't matter though. We don't have to have a perfect sequence of numbers. You can skip numbers. You can start at 1,000,000 if you'd like. You can use the decimal system to squeeze zones in between each other. There's a lot of flexibility with the reading order in Equidox. We have 3 different methods of doing it, and I'll explain all 3 of them. But this is, and then this is zone 5, 6. This is zone 7 because I made it too tall. If I move it down a bit, I'll fix that. If I reorder it again, now this one is 7 and this one is 8. So it's just scanning the page left to right, top to bottom. And every time it intersects a new zone, it's going to sequence that next in the reading order. So now my reading order for this page is pretty much spot on, exactly what I need it to be. I have the address, the phone number, the mobile number, and did I not make the mobile number zone big enough? Sometimes drawing zones manually you can miss some content. There we go. There's the full phone number, and then the email address as well. So that's one way of setting the reading order, just at the standard sort of top to bottom, left to right reading order. You can also choose 2, 3, or 4 columns as well. So keep that in mind if you have a 2-column or a 3-column document, whatever it may be. The logic behind that is if you were to set it as a 2-column page, Equidox draws an invisible line down the center of the page, and then it applies that left to right reading order to the left side, and then it will move over to the right side. So the default is just top to bottom, left to right, but then you can also choose these other settings if you'd like. You can also interact with a specific zone. So like if you want to set the reading order for a specific zone, let's just say, for example, if I want this logo to be read first on the page, if I were to change this to 1, then I'd have to change this to 2. So I don't want to play this like musical chairs game of like moving all of these zones around. So the order field over here, which is right below the zone type and the language attribute. But if I just put a period in front of the 2, 0.2 is less than 1. And like I said before, we don't have to use integers. We don't have to have a perfect sequence of numbers. 0.2 is less than 1, so 0.2 is going to be read first. So now it's at the very top of the reading order. That's not a very good use of it. I can just go back to the page and just reorder the entire page. But that is something that you can do if you'd like to interact with a specific zone. Not all pages have like a perfect layout to them. You might have some sort of floating object that's in the middle of the page. You want it to be read in a specific spot. So you can get the reading order set for the majority of the page, and then just select that one item that you'd like, and then just use the decimal system to squeeze it into the reading order exactly where it needs to go. So you can put it between 2 other zones. without having to play like a musical chairs game of shifting every other zone around it down a full integer. So I hope that makes sense. But that's another way of going about setting the reading order. So you can interact with reading order at the page level through this drop-down menu, choosing the layout type and pressing reorder. The individual zone level, where you're selecting a zone and you're using the order field. And we also have a multi-select feature, which I'll explain in just a second. So I'm going to jump here to page 4. This one actually has something interesting on it. So this is a perfect example of like Microsoft Word automated tagging, where you get this 2-column section down here and you get p tags going straight across 2 columns. So this is going to be a very confusing layout and way of going about reading this content, because these 3 items are supposed to be underneath this like heading, and the same thing for these over here, but they're going to just be read straight across these 2 columns, leaving a lot of confusion as to what is the actual proper reading order for this page. Now, this is just because of that existing tag structure, but we can fix it very quickly using the zone detector tool. So if I come back in here and I can see now I've redetected the page and I have the proper sort of granularity of this, all of the different paragraphs and chunks of text, and I've got a much better starting point. Now from here, I might set this as a heading level 2. I've jumped around a bit. I wouldn't normally skip page 2 and 3, but for the interest of time I have today. So I'm going to set these as heading level 2s. And then these 2 elements in here, they're almost like a list without actual list labels. If you can tell, like they're meant to be like listed underneath this labor and this nuisance construction. So what I might do here is if I just keep that zone on top of those 4 elements, I can change this zone to a sensitivity zone. You can do that through the drop-down menu, or you can hit S on your keyboard. And when you do that, you then get a new slider tool. And this will just detect the elements inside of that zone itself without disrupting everything else around it on the page. So once I've redetected, I can then hit remove zone. And I'm going to call this a heading level 3 by just hitting 3 on my keyboard. So I'll do the same thing here. I'll hit S and I will redetect inside of that section, remove the sensitivity zone, and mark it a heading level 3. So that's given me the proper sort of amount of p tags for this page alone. So I don't really have to create any more zones. But I do now have a reading order issue. So the reading order is going to be a problem because I go from 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 to 13. You can kind of see the problem here. This doesn't make any sense from a logical reading order perspective. So this is where that multi-select tool for the reading order comes in handy. So because of the layout of this page, being that the majority of it is a left to right, top to bottom page, you just have this very small section of the page, which is actually 2 columns. The 2-column reading order is not really going to do me much good here. It's not going to put these in the correct reading order because it's going to apply that 2-column layout to all of these zones first. And it's going to leave this one in like the left column, and then this will be read at the very end of the page. So it's not really going to do me a whole lot of good here. So what I'll do is I'm going to use that third tool for setting the reading order, which is called the div zone, D-I-V. If I just draw a zone and all it has to do is touch this series of zones, I just want to expand these a bit to show you. All it has to do is touch and overlap with them in any way. And if I change this zone to div through the drop-down menu, or I could hit D on my keyboard to change the zone type, I then just have to pick a master number. In this case, my master number is going to be 4 because 4 is after 3. So I want this to be read directly after this zone here. And if I hit reorder this div, what it does is it reorders just those 4 zones using the decimal system. So I have 4.001, 002, 003, so on and so forth. So I've now reordered just these 4 zones without having to disrupt anything else on the page. And when I go to the preview again, I'm going to have my heading level 2, my heading level 3. I know what I did. I didn't reorder this one. So let me just go here, and I'm going to use the div zone again. And this is going to be reading zone 5. And if I press reorder this div, it's going to reorder those zones in the with the master number of 5, but then using the decimal system from there. And then pressing the preview again, now I have the correct reading order where I have my heading level 2, my heading level 3, the 3 schools that are related to that labor only heading, and then the 5 elements that are related to that noose and construction heading. And then everything else on the page looks pretty good. So this is another kind of like unique example of existing tag structure not being correct, but we can quickly make that adjustment. We have a few tricks up our sleeve to deal with this kind of unique reading order here. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. We have a few minutes left. I definitely want to make sure that we have time to cover tables, at least the basics of tables. But are there any questions at this point? Anything that I can explain further?
This is Stephanie. It's kind of a bigger scale question, but I just wanted to bring it up while we have you. We were having some trouble with larger file sizes of 200 or 300 pages, and just wanted to hear you say if there's like an optimal file size or a kind of an upper limit for what will work well.
So there are browser limitations with the upload size. I want to say it depends on how you authenticate. So if you authenticate through Firebase, meaning that we would set you up with a Google single sign-on solution or a Microsoft single sign-on, you have a larger file size that you can upload. But it's like Google Chrome puts a limitation on how large of a file you can upload to the cloud. And once it's uploaded, though, you shouldn't have an issue importing it. It might take longer than the files that we've done today. But I know that we've imported files like with a lot of megabytes, even upwards of like close to a gigabyte. I'm not sure if you have the exact file size like on hand. Was it an upload issue or an import issue? Do you know? Or were you able to get the tool? Were you able to get it into Equidox and then you had trouble remediating it once it was in?
I think amongst a few of us, we had each type of problem. So perhaps it's something we can use the help contact form to send you.
Exactly, that would be perfect. And they can look at the logs and figure out like, is it a server or a database issue? Like, is the file too big, or is there like a ton of traffic for whatever reason on the servers? It's like slowing things down, or something corrupt about that source file. They can like figure all of that out. It's hard to speak in absolutes when I don't have the exact example in front of me, but I mean, we've imported documents well over 1,000 pages. We do it on a regular basis. So a couple of 100 pages shouldn't be a problem, unless it's like, the only thing I can think of is if it's full of like high resolution images, like a huge file size, because it's got like a bunch of very like heavy, like a lot of data that's like locked inside of those images. But there's always ways of us to get it in for you. If you have trouble, we can probably just get it in through like the back door of the application. Like we can import it on our side and just put it into your account for you. If that's ever like a problem. And then also, if you're interested in integrating with single sign-on, that will then allow for a larger file size to be uploaded to the cloud. So there's some limitations from the browser, but we can bypass that if we authenticate you through Google or Microsoft. So that's another conversation, not for today, but if that's something that you're interested in doing, we can set that up very quickly for you. Okay, so let's jump out of this, and I want to cover tables, because that's another pretty critical element type that we haven't covered yet. All right, so I have a document here that has a table in it, and this is another example of a document that was previously tagged, and this is very obviously poorly tagged. So another thing that you might come across is when you open the document up, it's like, holy cow, what is all of this? This like layered and like all of this like overlapping zones. This is like a real mess. We don't have to worry about this, because this template from this company, who knows what happened to this document over its life cycle. This template might have been passed around by 20 different editors and edited 100 different ways on different operating systems and different versions of Microsoft Word. So we have a real disaster of a tag structure on our hands, but we can just ignore it. Keep in mind, just use that zone detector, and it's all of that mess went away, and now we're left with like a much cleaner starting point. Now, I really don't care about the other elements on this page because we've kind of covered like heading structure and such and stuff like that. But I want to make sure that we talk about like a table. So a table is pretty straightforward. If you just draw a zone over the entire table, you can ignore all of those text zones underneath. You don't have to worry about those. And then if you hit T on your keyboard, T for table, or you can change the zone type through the drop-down menu if you'd like. And then you can open up the table editor. So the table editor will then isolate the table. So I'm just working with the table now. I don't have any of the other stuff on the page to worry about. And these green grid lines is really Equidox just kind of taking a basic guess at the cell structure of the table based on how I drew that zone around it. So it did an okay job, but it can certainly improve on itself. So we have another set of sliders down here, the table detector. And this is, again, using machine learning and computer vision. But if I just move these sliders back and forth, I can find that like kind of sweet spot that's going to give me the best starting point. So something like that should be just about perfect. So when I refresh this or when I look at the preview, I'm going to have a nice clean HTML table. And that's really all there is to it. When you have like a nice, like a table that has good structure to it, where, you know, it wasn't like a very creatively designed table. A lot of people design very bad tables from an accessibility standpoint. They like to use things for, they like to use tables for like layout when stuff doesn't necessarily fit into the scope of what an actual table is supposed to be. A table is supposed to be tabular data, column headers, row headers, table data. That's really what a table is supposed to be. But a lot of people will like plug in information into table formats because it looks nice to organize data that way, but it's not really what a table is supposed to be from an accessibility standpoint. So in certain cases, you have to do a little bit more finesse work with tables just because of the nature of how it was designed and laid out. But if you have a nice clean table like this, that's typically all you're going to need to do is use these table detection tools and then, you know, look at your preview and you've got a nice clean HTML table. It looks pretty much exactly the same as that source file. Now, there are a few other things here within the table editor. If you have a table that has multiple column headers or multiple row headers or vice versa, if it doesn't have any column headers or whatever, you can set those at this in these two fields here. So for example, if I have like 2 column headers, I can change that to 2. And I can then press the preview button. And now I have bold font in the top 2 rows, if you can tell. So that bold font is just indicating that those are going to be read as headers, whereas the standard font is going to be read as table data. If I don't want to have any row headers, I can make that 0. So now I'll have 2 column headers and I will have no row headers. So I don't have any of the bold font on that row anymore. So depending on the table and the headers that you have within that table, you can adjust those numbers here. The default is just a 1-to-1 ratio, but if you have something that deviates from a 1-to-1 header ratio, you can change that. Another thing is that the table summary will auto-populate for you if you set this up in your profile, which I'll explain. And I realize that we're over time and I want to be respectful of your time. But it is a lot to cover in just an hour. So if anyone needs to drop, I totally understand. The table summary can be programmatically written for you by Equidox. So as you make changes to your rows and columns, this will automatically update. So if I were to like set 2 column headers, for example, it will then notify me in the summary that there are multiple column headers. So it's nice to have that written for you automatically. You also have 2 tabs in the table editor. So the main one is the table tab, but you can interact with individual cells as well. You have nudge features so that you can move all of your columns left or right. If they're just off a bit, you can move them up and down. It really just depends. Typically, you won't need to use these very much, but they are nice when you have like very dense tables with maybe 50 rows. You can move them all up and down in unison. You also have the ability to add additional columns and rows manually. So if you need to split a column or merge together a column to remove an extra column, you have buttons to do that as well. And there are buttons that appear at the top as well. So once you have a cell selected, you can use these buttons up here across the top. You can also span. So if you have like to span across, if you've got like a column header that spans across 2 columns, you can hold down Shift and select in the 2 cells that you want to span. And there's a span button here, or you can press S on your keyboard, and that will turn those 2 cells like a light hue of green. And when you look at the preview, this is not correct, of course, but I have those two cells spanned together. So those are like sort of the main things to look out for in tables if you have to span them, or if you've got like multiple column headers or something like that. But for the most part, the table editor is very easy to work with. You've got these green grid lines. You're pretty much just trying to get them lined up with the cell structure of the table itself. And then when you save the table and close out of it, we had a bunch of individual zones underneath it before, but they have been overridden by this table zone. So now I don't have to worry about all of those like individual text zones that I had before. So I want to show you very quickly how to turn on your table summary if you want to use this. If you just go to your profile in the upper right-hand corner, if you choose the auto summarize mode, if you just change it to default to enabled, and then you hit save, it will then automatically write those table summaries for you. And then the output default tab, maybe you want to choose PDF. I'm not sure, yours might be on HTML just out of the gate, but if you always want to export to PDF, you can turn your default output tab to PDF if you'd like. And then the zone highlight width is really just the border that goes around the zone. So if you want that off or if you want it to be small, it's there for people with low vision or color blindness to make it very obvious which zone they have selected. So you can choose what you're comfortable with and just save those properties. And then when you start working on documents again, those changes will then come into effect. Okay, so I'm 5 minutes over. I apologize for being long-winded today, too much coffee. If there's any questions, I have more time. If you'd like to hang out and talk more, I'm more than happy to do so. But otherwise, I will let everyone get on with their day. I hope everyone found this at least helpful to get started. I don't expect anyone to be an expert off of this 1 hour training, but as long as you can get kind of like a feel for the application, we can get back together in a couple of weeks and talk more about it and kind of go through some of your real world examples and help you kind of clean up any of your questions or workflow issues that you might have been having.
This is Stephanie. Thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to having access to the video for those of us who were here and those of us who weren't here today. And I think we'll be in touch with questions and digging into the help documentation in the next few weeks before our next training.
Perfect. And one other thing I'll mention is that if you go to our website, equidox.co, if you go to the resources and webinars, I do a monthly webinar. I have one coming up in a couple of weeks, but if you go to the webinar recordings, there's a library of recordings here that they're 30 minutes each, but they're like effectively like training resources as well. So if you have like specific questions on like, headings or tables or lists, there's more detailed information where I'm spending like 30 minutes going into like a deep dive into a single topic. So if you are struggling with something, there might be an answer in these webinars as well. So just another resource that you have if you'd like to use them. They're on our website under resources and the webinar section.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to our Equidox colleagues and for all the U of M folks for joining today. And I'll follow up to share the recording when it's available. And please get in touch with any questions that come up after today.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Dan, and I'll be happy to help.
Thanks, Russ.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.